So our next speaker is Dr. Alfiee Breland-Noble, as she's called, Dr. Alfiee, and she's from Georgetown, and she's the project director and founder of the, AAKOMA project, and CEO of the AAKOMA Center. And she is a gifted public speaker, researcher, media personality, consultant, and fully licensed psychologist. She's realized her passion for helping racially diverse young people achieve optimal mental health via research and care for depression, anxiety, and other mental illnesses. I think you will really enjoy this next speaker. Dr. Alfiee?
No pressure. She said you're really going to enjoy it, so now I got to make sure you enjoy it. So I apologize up front. I'm so sorry. I feel terrible. So I have low energy, which is probably going to make you laugh because I'll probably perk up and you'll say, if that's low energy, I don't want to see anything else. But it is a joy to be with you this morning. I want to thank Devin and Carolyn, my illustrious person who came up here and put all the pressure on me to do a good job this morning. Thank you so much. I appreciate you deeply. And I see some faces that I recognize just from the period of time I've been doing this work, and I need to get it moving because I like to talk, which you would never guess, and that clock is going to run out on me, and I know I have 20 minutes. So the first thing I want to do is share with you that I'm going to ask you to be engaged. I'm a treatment engagement researcher by training, and engagement is deeply important to me. And again, I'm going to apologize for the low energy because it's even a little bit hard for me to talk. I just don't feel well. So with that, there's one space in which I want to ask you to help me out this morning. Well, actually two. The first is I have anxiety, which I say all the time. So anybody who heard me speak has heard me say this. And one of the things that helps me manage my anxiety is good vibes and good energy. All right? So I'm going to say good morning. Very good, but y'all can do better than that. But give me one second. So I'm going to say good morning, and then what I want you to do is say it back to me in your language of origin, the first language you ever learned. All right? So I am learning. Je comprends peu le français. Apu? And I know a couple ways to say hello. And what I want you to do when I say good morning is say it back to me in the first language that you ever learned as a human being. All right? So on count of three, I'm going to say good morning, and then you're going to say it back. 1, 2, 3, good morning. I love it. I heard a lot of English, but I heard some other stuff in there too. All right, so let me get in my como está for any of my Pinay brothers and sisters in here. Bonjour for my folks who speak French. And hola for my brothers and sisters who are Latinx or speak Spanish. So how do I, is it this? Oh, a clicker. Let me use my brain. Let me use the brain, Alfie. Okay. There we go. All right. So this is me. And why is this important? Well, it's important because I am a recovering academic. And I know for recovery, I'm no longer full-time at Georgetown, so I was going to make that clear. I am full-time working for me, which is wonderful. I love it, and I highly recommend it. But with that said, I do want to share with you who I am and what my background is and how I come to this work. So I've been funded off and on as a clinical investigator, clinical researcher for 20 years because I started when I was 10, right? And I'm a disparities researcher by training, and I needed an excuse to stick my book up there, so that's why I put a picture of the book, all right? So you know I edited a book. My area of expertise is in African American Black youth and youth of color and their mental health needs. But it has expanded over the years, the 15 plus years I spent in academic medicine in departments of psychiatry, most recently at Georgetown, doing this work with racially diverse populations. It's also important for me to acknowledge that I am a mama. That's a blessing, right? I'm a mom of 2 kids. So pretty soon I'm going to be harassing some of y'all when we do campus visits, right? Because I'm a psychologist and I'm going to be asking all the hard questions about what kind of services do you have for these black and brown children. So don't be mad at me because I'm warning you now, it's coming. And I have a son who is an 8th grader. I'm also a stakeholder. I do a lot of work with an organization called PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. They fund a lot of my work. And part of that work means that I'm a stakeholder. Everybody in here has been a patient. Everybody in here has probably been an advocate for a patient. right? And so it's important to acknowledge that because I feel like that's the way in which we can find connection with people. So you've already indulged me on one thing. The second thing I want to ask you to, there we go, indulge me with is thinking about how do we reach everybody. Well, one of the ways we reach everybody, particularly on college campuses, is by acknowledging our places, our points of synergy. Right? So this is why I want to ask you to indulge me. I would like everybody to back up a little bit from your chair. Forgive me, Devin. I'm probably not supposed to do this, but I hope you will indulge me. It's just a quick experiment. Anybody in here who ever in their life has felt marginalized, I want to ask you to stand up. I'm already standing. I want everybody to look around the room. Almost everybody in here is standing. All right, I want you to take that in. Please have a seat. Why is that important? Because what we're going to be talking about is the experience of young people on your campuses who feel that way all the time. Right? And so it's important for us to acknowledge the spaces and places in which we felt marginalized because that allows us to build connections across race, across ethnicity, across sexual orientation, across ability status, across gender, across being non-gender, binary, or queer. It's across all of those because the differences are what make us, I think, they're the space in which we can unite. Everybody's different from everybody else. That person over there is not different from me. We are different from each other. And that's a different way to frame it because for many of our young people, they come onto campuses, ones who look like me. Now, I happen to go to Howard, HU, you know, and so everybody looked like me. And it was wonderful. So when I was at Howard, my classmates were Anthony Anderson from Blackish, right? We didn't know he was going to be famous. Puffy, P. Diddy, he didn't have 50 million names, but these were the people I was in school with. Taraji was a few years behind me, even though we're close to the same age. I'm dating myself, I know. But the point is that everybody looked like me. And so when I look on TV and I see all these luminaries who are black and African American, Claire Huxtable from back in the day, Felicia Rashad, she's a Howard grad. These are the people I saw, so I always felt welcome on campus, right? But I have 3 other degrees from 3 institutions, none of which are HBCUs. So I also know what it feels like to get on campus and feel like I'm by myself, all right? And so with that, I'm going to keep it moving. So one of the things I want to also share with you is I just want to make a brief mention about my ACHA project. Man, that clock moves fast. The ACHA project, which is rooted in really trying to reduce mental health disparities. It started with African American youth and has expanded to youth of color, broadly defined. All right, so in terms of achieving the mental health equity for racially diverse students, I come from a Catholic tradition. Yeah, and all my Catholic folks in here know about that Catholic guilt, right? I come from that, but I'm also, look at me now, because it's like seeing a lunar eclipse. A black Catholic, you only see one every 100 years or so. All right, so, but my spouse is Protestant, he's Baptist. We are an ecumenical family, we are not confused. I just want people to hear that, okay? So we're an ecumenical family, I want to reframe it that way. So I come from a tradition of homilies, quick, because you know Catholics, we in and out, we don't play that. You talking too long, people start coughing, right? Right, it's a polite way to say, wrap it up. But from the Baptist tradition, that's a little different. Right? So anybody of any race from a Baptist tradition, you know when the pastor says, I'm almost finished, you got about 35 more minutes left. So we're not going to do that, but we're going to stay in this tradition. We're going to have 3 R's I want you to remember, right? And that's going to be the way that we're going to walk through this idea of how we create equity in innovative ways for racially diverse college students, keeping in mind that within the context of them being racially diverse, there's also different levels and degrees and types of marginalized identities. These young people are not marginal human beings, but they are marginalized, pushed out to the margins because people have ideas about who they are and what they bring with their full selves into the settings in which we work. Of course, none of you do that in here, so those other people, and nobody who's watching online, none of these folks do this, those other folks, right? That's who does that. But this is what happens to our young people. So the first R, reality. What is the reality within which our young people function on our college campuses? When we think about, I was looking up some data last night and I ran across the 2018 annual report of the AUCCCD. okay? So if I get it wrong, I know y'all gonna correct me because I know, academics, that's what we do. But what I saw was, in terms of the racial composition, starting with census data, I looked that up too, about just under 50%, now this census data that I looked up 2017, that talked about college enrollment, just under 50% of students on college campuses, according to the US Census, are students of color, which surprised me because I thought it would be much lower than that. Right? So you're already in rarefied air because only about a quarter, maybe 30% of Americans get college degrees. But then you layer on top of that, take all the kids of color. This is every race and ethnicity that's not white. And it's about 50%, a little less than 50% of who's on college campus. That's the reality. The additional reality is the counseling centers don't look like that. All right? So the counseling centers for a lot of our young people are the place we want to encourage them to go to get mental health supports. Now, this is not an indictment. This is part of the reality that we're living in. About 75%, maybe a little more, of our counseling centers are not people of color. So about 75% are white staff. Right? So that means everybody else is in that quarter. So you already see that there's a mismatch. Right? Now, racial matching is not an imperative, but it's important to our young people. So there are all kinds of stories that they share with us. I don't want to go into the counseling center, right, because we know stigma is very big for students of color in general. And what young people will say, I talk to them all the time, so do you. Well, I don't want to go in there because they're not going to understand my problems. I don't want to explain, you see what I look like. There's this thing about being dark-skinned versus light-skinned in Latinx, Asian, African-American communities, because they're not going to get it, right? That's the reality. Another reality is that our young people are dealing with things that I don't have to tell you: racism, other forms of discrimination, gender discrimination, transphobia, homophobia, right? Xenophobia, all kinds of things. This is their reality. So I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but it's important to acknowledge that this is what our students are bringing to campus with them. Many are coming to us with family histories, y'all know the literature, of undiagnosed mental illness, right? And if somebody tried to give them a label, oh no, we don't accept that, right? So in many communities of color, what families will say is, those are first world problems. Mental illness is a first world problem. I had a young Filipina tell me that last summer, right? In African American households, we say those are white people problems. We don't have those issues, so they sitting up here telling you, you got anxiety, child, that ain't no anxiety. Don't take that medicine they're giving you. This is the reality that many of our young people are coming to us with. Not all, but many. So that's the reality. That's the first start. So we have to be realistic about what our students are bringing to campus and what their experiences are once they hit campus. The second is we have to be reflective. We have to think about, in the context of our campuses, what is it that our young people need, and what is it, I'm going back to my notes, that we can offer our young people. All right? So when we think about reflecting, we have to think about what can we do given the resources that we have. Again, it maybe is not possible for your campus to import a whole bunch of people of color to diversify the counseling center and diversify the faculty. But there are other things that you can do, right? So we can look at programs. This is where we get into talking about the innovation. We have to be reasonable in terms of thinking about what do we have at our disposal that we can utilize to help our young people. So I think about innovative programs. This is why I start talking about innovation. So if anybody wants to take notes, this is where they go. The Big East program, or the Big East Conference with student athletes. So in the Big East Conference, they have these two programs for the basketball players. One is called Transition Game. The other one is called Freshman Fundamentals. Both of these programs are designed to present life skills, coping skills, all kinds of good, valuable information to the young people. The Transition Game is for the Big East freshman male ballers, right? So they're first-year students. And they get trained in all kinds of things related to mental health and well-being, including intimate partner violence, right? Social media use, right? That is an innovative program. Even if it's just a sprinkling for a weekend, it is beginning conversations that we want our young people to have at some point throughout their college career, because these are things that are going to come up. I also think about things like the college mental health program at McLean Hospital, one of the 50 million Harbor hospitals, run by Dr. Stephanie Pender-Amaker, right? That's an innovation, right? So with the resources that they have, Dr. Pender Amaker has created a program to address college student mental health needs, and it's one of the only programs of its kind in the country. I also think about reflecting. We think about what does the literature tell us about what is going on with our young people. So one thing that we truly need is data. We don't have data on our young people of color. So there are some organizations, there's one, the Collegiate Mental Health Program, I know I'm saying it wrong, at Penn State, or was it Penn State? But there's also a recent study that came out from the Healthy Minds group that I was a collaborator on in the Journal of Adolescent Health, right? So the data is critical, right? What does that mean for you all in terms of reflecting on your own campuses? It means you gotta have data. And so the idea is that we want to engage the young people who are our end users to reflect on what are their needs and what can we provide. Right? So the engagement piece is key. One of the programs that I'm also involved with is a collaboration between the JED Foundation, one of the sponsors, and an organization called the Steve Fund, and many of you have probably heard of it. It's called the Equity and Mental Health Framework. Right? There's a list of 10 recommendations, another R, that allow colleges and universities, you can find it online, to reflect on what it is that they have and what it is that they might be able to build to support the mental health needs of college students of color. All right, so we have to reflect. We have to be realistic, we have to reflect, and then we have to finally be reasonable. All right, so that goes back to this idea of once I know what my young people need on my campus, and once I know what resources I have available, then my job is to make those things work. Right? I think the key in terms of being reasonable is to be consistently active and engaged with our young people. So once you reflect on what you have available to you, once you're realistic about what the experience of the young people is, then you have to engage consistently, not only with your students, but with your faculty, staff, and administrators to make sure that you understand what are they pushing you for, what do they need from you, and what is it exactly that you can give back to them, right? So the fact that these are not things that are incredibly innovative, these are not things that are incredibly earth-shattering. The issue is, or the main idea is that it's an active, ongoing, engaged process. And I think this is what our young people of color are looking for from us on these college campuses. There are too many campuses, of course, none of these in here, none of the folks online, where none of these conversations are happening. Right? And so if we don't have the conversations, that turns into things like what we call benign neglect. Our intentions are good, but you know how these students are nowadays, they're gonna let you know if they're unhappy. Right? In my day, the worst we did was take over the administration building. Right? But nowadays, these kids don't play. They'll take over the admin building, and it's going to be pictures on Instagram, it's going to be pictures on Twitter, it's going to be stuff on Now This, right? Because they have all these platforms that they can get the word out. And so I think, like my sister said, Mrs. How do I say it? Winnefeld, I'm sorry, I was going to say Winstrom. Mrs. Winnefeld said, you know, being vocal, right? Our young people are going to be vocal. Right? And so our job is to be responsive to our young people. And I think in terms of us being reasonable about what we have, what we can offer, and then the final R, sort of on the side, I said there were 3, reporting back. So if you are doing things, as you are doing things, it is important to report back to your constituents, your students, faculty, staff, administrators, what you are doing. That can come in unique forms. It might be newsletters. It might be social media. If you don't have a social media page for your work, I think you need one, right? We do want to teach young people to manage social media better and don't be glued to it all the time. And at the same time, that's how they communicate, right? So again, being reasonable about what we have access to, and it's cheap, right? It's not expensive to make a tweet, make an Instagram post, take a picture, use some of these free platforms to help you create innovative posts that you can put on different spaces. And that's the stuff that's going to allow your students to know and understand that you take their issues and needs seriously. All right? So going back, reality, be aware of what's going on your campus. Reflection, be thoughtful about what you can and cannot do. And reason, make sure that you're engaging with your constituents. Now, all of these things are important for a very specific reason. I ask them, doing okay on time? And the reason that they're important is this famous quote. I'm going to forget his first name, but his last name is B-O-Y-E. The reason your young people need you to do these things, the reason we need these innovations, the reason it's important to have these conversations is because sometimes the most important trip you can take in life is to meet somebody halfway. And with that, I am done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alfiee. Do we have some questions for Dr. Alfiee? If I could, I will try to do this sli.do, sli.do. Use the hashtag ACHA19, and then we can go ahead and take some questions. So I guess one question, Dr. Alfiee, is regarding how do you get started in this conversation on campus? Where do you recommend someone to that's trying to figure this all out start?
Sure. So I think for a lot of people, the conversations, particularly around race, ethnicity, are scary, and people don't want to say the wrong thing. And so they just avoid having a conversation altogether. And I think often a place to start is to get a small group of people on campus together who are invested and who want to have the conversations and create a safe space for those people to have the conversations. I'm talking about faculty, staff, administrators, because you all are really who drive the change. And I think from there, you can expand it out to include students. But I think the key is always making sure that the space is safe. So I'm a psychologist, so setting the standard, many of you are as well, mental health professionals, setting the standard up front of there's no such thing as a dumb question, and then honoring that, laying out the ground rules. But I think the key is somebody, right? I'm thinking of my my religious training. Any place where two people can be gathered together, two or more, right? That's the idea, is you got to get people together and start the conversation. Because as long as there's silence, people can read all kind of stuff into silence. And we don't want our young people reading into silence. We want them reading into our actual efforts to acknowledge and respect what their experiences are. And I will say, as a reformed faculty member, it's important for us too, right? Because it doesn't stop, as my colleagues, the Admiral and Mrs. said before, it doesn't stop when you graduate. So if we don't develop the skills to have the conversations in the college setting, once we leave, we still don't have those skills, right? So it's modeling, but it's also protective and supportive of us as well. So it's a great question. Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, another question right here. It's, sometimes marginalized students carry much anger to the conversation. How do you help students move beyond that to have productive discourse?
Yes. So I'll tell you, as someone who sits once a week on one side of the table, figuratively, with patients on the other side of the table. I had someone who kind of angry with me yesterday, and I think part of it is recognizing that there's this thing, I learned this from a patient, called being a gray rock, right? Be the gray rock. You have some of it, you're gonna have to let it come to you, because you may be the first person in that young person's life with whom they felt comfortable enough to voice those concerns. Right? So it's understanding that for many of these young people, they've never been able to talk about this stuff. It's also understanding that for many of these young people, they've never been in a situation that has made them feel as marginalized as they feel on some of our college campuses. So that's why I had everybody stand up at the beginning who'd ever felt marginalized. My suggestion is to tap into that, right? And then you use your counseling skills, reflective listening, summarizing. I understand what you're saying, and repeat it all back, because as you're repeating it back, it's giving you a chance to understand, but it's also giving you a chance, pardon the colloquialism, to get your mind right before you say something wrong because you're angry. You understand? And so I think that's what it is. It is receiving it, being open to hearing it, and understanding that we all have spots sort of outside of our line of sight, right? And I always want to grow and be educated, right? So educate me. So that's what I would say. Just be open to it and use some of your counseling skills. If you don't know, go Google some, look at some videos so you can practice, right? Learn how to be a good, just like a lay counselor, learn how to be a good lay counselor, okay? All right.
That's great. Other questions, a reminder for our folks that are also online, if you go to sli.do, you can put in #ACHA19 to ask your question. I think there's a question in the audience. Let me, hold on a second. Again, we'll try to use the online system just for our folks that are online, please.
Yes, sorry.
Hi, I'm Lisa Park from George Mason. So we're a local university
Yes.
too, and very diverse student population, but
Yes.
it's been frustrating that our
Yes.
staff and faculty are not necessarily reflective of that. So do you
Yes.
have any thoughts on how to recruit or how
Yes.
to diversify our staff?
Yeah, so I'm going to mention one school that I forgot to mention when I was giving the presentation, Western Michigan University. I think they have this, I'm going to name it wrong, but Insight into Diversity in Higher Education has an annual award that they give about higher education excellence and diversity. I think that's what it's called, HEED. And Western Michigan was singled out for that. One of the things that immediately jumps to mind to me is something that they do is provide implicit bias training for all, what do they call them, recruiting teams, right? So the teams that are going to be doing the interviewing and bringing people to campus for different positions, they give them implicit bias training. I think that's key because you have to start, I think we have to start with the resources that are available to us. And I think for many of us, again, it's outside the line of sight. What do people do? They have a new job. They're like, oh, my friend who was in graduate school with me, right? I'm going to call them first because that's my buddy. And most of the time, these are people who look just like them. And especially if it was me coming from Howard, everybody's going to be black. So I think that's some of it, the implicit bias training. I think it's also being willing to sit down again as a group and have a conversation about this is a problem and finding your allies who are empowered, because I'm looking at you clearly, I don't know if you identify as such, what I'm seeing is a person of color. We can't always be the ones to say this stuff, right? Because one, it's tiring. I know I'm tired, right? And two, sometimes people aren't able to hear it, right? So I think about queer brothers and sisters, right? And non-binary gendered folks. Sometimes I have to be the one to say, well, you know, I haven't seen any trans people, or I haven't seen any, you know, queer folks on our list. We're going to need to do something about that. And I'm sure from my queer brothers and sisters, it's like, ooh, thank God, somebody else said it. I ain't have to say it. So I think it's some of that. It's aligning with allies who you can share that information with, and then they need to go take it to someone. I think the other thing is it is presenting the case to higher ups. You know, this is, you may be a senior person on your campus, that it makes, as my sister said before me, financial sense to ensure that the people in the counseling center or in faculty, staff, administrator positions reflect the campus. Because I can tell you, for these savvy lawnmower parents, that's me, lawnmower parents, as we call, I call them jungle machete parents, because we're going through the jungle, just moving all the stuff, brush out the way so the kids just have a beautiful, clear path. It's not healthy, I know, but I'm owning my stuff. I think it's important because as this generation of young people begins to progress and get into college, parents like me, if my kids are going to go to, I'm going to be honest, predominantly white institution, then I need to make sure that who's in that counseling center, that there's some diversity. It can't just be one, right? And so it makes financial sense from a recruitment standpoint. And what do the young people say? I don't want to go to a school where the only diversity is the stuff I see in the brochure, right? So they're going to vote with their feet. So it makes financial sense to ensure that that counseling center, and if you, until we can get there, make sure everybody has some cultural competence training, ongoing, updated, not from you all in the counseling center who are their peers, because that's not the burden you're supposed to be tasked with unless they're going to pay you. Okay? And so I think those are just 2 or 3 ideas. All right, it's a great question.
Dr. Alfiee, one more question for you, maybe 2, but we've got a question here that says, do you have recommendations for supporting our clinicians of color in very rural white settings?
Ooh, yes, because I've been there, done that, child. Woo, Lord. So I think part of it is, I heard this really innovative program that's sort of, it was for students, but I think it can be the same for faculty, staff, and administrators. Also, I heard it in a different way with the Green Bay Packers. I am a New Orleans Saints fan, so I'm supposed to own my stuff. But I heard some of the brothers from the Green Bay Packers, which was similar to a program, I can't remember which school it was in upstate New York. And they talked about flying in barbers for the brothers because there were, I was like, oh, that's so smart. Because there were no people who knew how to cut African-American hair in Green Bay. I think it has to be things like that. The equivalent for this college and university was the coordinator would go out to the city or get on Amazon and buy a whole bunch of ethnic hair care products, right, which I clearly use, and would have those available in their office for people to take and use, for students and faculty, staff, administrators. There's another campus I work with in the spring, I won't name them, it's in the Northeast, and what they do to support faculty, staff, and administrators in their rural area is they would have gatherings for them, that's kind of obvious, but they would also do excursions. Right? So they would find a time, find a weekend when they could all go be somewhere, and as they said, they wouldn't have to be the only ones in the room who look like them. So I think it is those kinds of things. Having a critical mass, I have a minute and a half left, having a critical mass of folks who are able to gather, and it is recognizing that this is an issue for them, right? So again, going back to the beginning, the first R, I see my sister nod, thank you, Amen Corner, is that we have to recognize this is an issue. We can't put our heads in the sand and pretend like our brothers and sisters who are faculty, staff, administrators are not dealing with this same stuff. So if we can verbalize it and acknowledge it, we automatically create, I think, a better and safer space for the faculty and people of color who surround us.
Thank you, Dr. Alfiee.
All right.